Hola, comrades! Today's topic of interest, Reputation by Taylor Swift. Back in November, I released a video discussing the decline of Taylor Swift before concluding that if she didn't capitalize on her genuine talent and stop her petty feuds, her star would begin to dim. 2 months later, it looks like that is already starting to happen. The die-hard Swifties have eaten it up, of course, but to my pleasant surprise, the general public has rejected it. I mean that on relative terms, of course. Reputation sold almost 2 million copies in 2017, despite not being released until November of that year. It was her 4th album in a row to sell over 1 million copies in its first week. Basically every other artist recording today would kill for those kind of numbers. They would have been remarkable when the industry was thriving at the turn of the millennium. Now that the industry has been destroyed by the internet, numbers like these are downright miraculous. But they should be put in context. 1989, Taylor's previous album, sold over 3 million copies in roughly the same amount of time. Also, unlike 1989, which produced 3 #1 singles in Shake It Off, Blank Space, and Bad Blood, Reputation has failed to produce any singles that have caught on. Look What You Made Me Do, the lead single off the album, received significant airplay and even stayed at #1 for several weeks, but its run at the top was far shorter than that of Shake It Off, her last lead-off single, and its reception was not nearly as positive. My first response when I heard this song was, "We don't have time to deal with your drama, Taylor. We have more important things to worry about." And the response from the masses looks to be similar. It's not a fun song, it's not smart, and it's not even entertainingly banal. It's satire without the bite, a diss track with no venom, and introspection with no actual insight. I don't know what anyone was supposed to do with this. Honestly, the song's popularity might have decreased the album's chances for success, because it means people actually listen to this stolid, faux provocative piece of garbage. Reputation fell fast in sales after its initial release. Team Swift desperately tried to drum up promo for Ready For It, Gorgeous, and Call It What You Want, but the public wasn't buying, and for good reason. While none of the 3 songs reached the mind-numbing, visceral, abject awfulness of Look What You Made Me Do, all 3 were horrible pieces of music that did nothing to fight the growing perception that Taylor Swift did not care about the general public or their issues. This was also true of 1989, but the songs in that album had an emotional core and were compelling fantasies for the everyday listener. The same cannot be said for the songs in Reputation, which are turgid and lifeless, featuring Taylor Swift's worst production to date. Some of the worst production of the decade, if we're being honest. Combined with clunky lyrics that are not sharp enough to overcome their own pompous detachment. The real impact, however, isn't even in album sales or single performance. It's not even in the low sales for her Reputation tour. It's not in anything that happened, but rather in what didn't happen. One of my lasting memories of the year 2014 was watching Taylor Swift regain control over the music world. Witnessing Queen Taylor shift the conversation back to herself was nothing short of astounding. No more talk of Lorde, or Ariana, or Selena. It was all Taylor this and Taylor that. This was Napoleon returning from exile on the island of Elba and finding vast swaths of the French populace ready and willing to support him in his fight against the Bourbon dynasty for control of the nation. She reasserted her status as the biggest pop star in the world, and she faced no opposition. 2017 was different. After a longer than usual span between albums, Taylor Swift was welcomed back into the pop landscape with rapturous acclaim. We're at a loss concerning what direction music should go in. Increasingly, the importance of pop has receded, with trap, country, and easy listening gaining importance, resulting in a musical landscape flush with downbeat, melancholy tunes. Taylor could have framed the conversation in her terms. The music landscape was vulnerable. And yet, aside from the chaos that Look What You Made Me Do generated, the change effected was minimal. The string of moody, down-tempo songs continued. It was strangely underwhelming. There were think pieces being written about her, sure, but no more than usual, and they didn't have much to do with her music. There was no rush of critics tripping over themselves to declare her album one of the masterpieces of the century. By year's end, the heat generated by her new album had cooled, and on year's end lists, she was either mocked or ignored. Perhaps it's not accurate to declare that 2017 was a bad year for Taylor Swift, but that is only because there is no such thing as a bad year for Taylor Swift. She is still one of the biggest names in the world right now, and she has at her disposal a legion of superfans who will promptly dispatch anyone who makes negative comments about her. I myself was a victim of these superfans, who spammed my last video about Taylor Swift with dislikes. But the apathy among the general public is building up, and we need to look at why. There's nothing inherently wrong with making music that the average person cannot directly relate to. Some of the biggest and best songs of the 80s were made by hair metal gods, completely high on their own stardom. Some of the biggest and best songs of the 90s were made by rap gods, completely high on their own reputations. It's not just a matter of escapism. We want to be these superstars, yes, but it's not just because they're richer than us and because their lives are better than ours will ever be. It's also because they create the impression that their status gives them access to grander, more striking versions of emotions we feel every day. We may not be able to know the satisfaction and joy that comes from having enough money that you can throw around $500,000 on frivolous nonsense, but we can connect with that because we know what it feels like to be in control. We know that satisfaction, and we want that satisfaction, and this is a deeper level of that satisfaction. The same could be said of less positive emotions expressed by these stars. We might not be able to directly relate to Drake or Kanye rapping about how they're lost or confused or overwhelmed even though they're rich and successful, but we have felt lost and confused and overwhelmed. We have suffered even when we've appeared to the outside world to be doing alright, so we can empathize with their more sprawling, more dramatic expressions of these emotions. But Taylor Swift doesn't do that here. She doesn't want us to share in her turbulent emotional roller coaster. She wants to wave her superiority in our faces, despite only providing evidence to the mounting case that she is unstable and unaware. Reputation did not have to be a terrible album. By its dark, grimy nature, it was destined to sell worse than 1989, which makes it a very questionable commercial decision from the typically business-savvy Swift. But it didn't have to be this bad, this rancid, this cliché, this arrogant. It could have been a morose rumination on the pressures of fame. It could have been reflective and contemplative, and for those of you saying, she can't reflect, she's too self-absorbed, may I remind you that many of her best songs were reminiscences on her past. Back to December, Red, and the greatest song she will ever write, All Too Well, or her lamenting what had been with varying degrees of self-blame. There is no reason why Taylor could not have crafted a delicate, raw album exposing her own missteps and weaknesses as a celebrity, or barring that, she could have written about the negative personal impact celebrity has had on her. She could have discussed how celebrity had changed and corrupted her. Instead, she settled on this incomprehensible tone that's halfway between playing the victim and playing the villain. This results in her being an unsympathetic victim and a powerless villain. She has no command, no presence, no authority. It's no coincidence that the only song from the album that's still generating buzz, Endgame, is a song where she shares the spotlight with two other artists. Outside her hardcore fanbase, hardly anyone wants this iteration of Taylor Swift. She's not relatable, but she's too petty to be larger than life. She's not this earnest innocent anymore, but she's too confused to be a swaggering diva. There's still a market for Taylor Swift, just not for this version of her. Let's hope the commercial failure of Reputation leads her to reinvent herself. I seriously hope that Taylor Swift would become a more mature artist as she accrued more life experience. I hoped that she would gain a more nuanced perspective on the world. Instead, she has retreated from the world into the confines of her own celebrity, where nothing's more important than what the media thinks of her or who last broke up with her. I'm not saying she has to be Bob Dylan. She doesn't. I'm just saying she should use the opportunities that fame has gifted her to expand her horizons instead of sinking into her self-aggrandizing faux superiority. Anyway, if you liked what you saw today, consider donating to my Patreon so I can produce even more amazing content. Also, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that reputable stuff. Adios, camaraderie!